This is the Think Again podcast. I'm Scott Jens, your host, and today's episode is titled, A Look at Today's Optometric Education. Our guest is Dr. Mark Colip, president of the Illinois College of Optometry, and also current president of the board of directors of ASCO, which is the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry. Dr. Colip, welcome to the Think Again podcast.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jens. I appreciate the invitation. It's a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you. We really appreciate that somebody in your position of one of optometry's most prestigious optometry schools is giving us the time to learn more. You've been at ICO for decades. I don't know exactly how long. How long has it been?
31 years now.
Okay. And you've been president of ICO for nearly 6 years. So I know you have a very broad perspective on the trajectory of optometric education. Let's start by asking you to do a then and now comparison. What would you say is the primary difference in optometric education today compared to at the beginning of your career, 25 or 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, Scott. Certainly technology use in the profession has changed dramatically over that time period. The expansion of pharmaceuticals alone in the time you and I have been practicing. We've seen scope expansion across the states in the United States and even the Canadian provinces where many of our students come from. The breadth of the NBO and state licensure requirements have changed and been upgraded in that time period. Certainly, you know this better than I, but practice management is much more complex today than it was back then. I mean, I can certainly remember doctors when I was observing that, we're still on a cash basis, and I don't think that happens anymore. Insurance penetration, major medical, vision care plans, getting students to kind of get their arms around that and understand that during the time they're with us. To be education specific a little bit more, I guess use of technology in instruction really expanded during the COVID time period where we had to go remote. And we learned a lot of things from that, and some of the things we've kept, and some of our students really like some of those things. Retirement of many long-term faculty and educators. I think we have a bit of a younger workforce now in higher education, and there's goods and bad about that as well. Increased number of female faculty, increased diversity in our faculty, I think nationwide. Those things are both good things that are increasing. With regard to students, much more generous with their own time and volunteerism, much more so than I can remember in my generation in optometry school. We were, a little bit more selfish with our time, but these students today are really incredible in what they get behind and want to volunteer their time with, perhaps sometimes too much, but that's what they do. Their use of social media, that didn't even exist when we were in school, right? And now they are in constant contact with everyone, their colleagues, their friends, their parents, faculty, which actually puts a different dynamic in play with our faculty. Our faculty find that students are trying to access them, much more after hours and weekends, and they kind of expect a response right away too, just because social media is their life. And then certainly student expectation of our utilization of technology, not only in patient care, but in instruction. And so all those things have changed pretty dramatically over time.
Wow, what a tremendous list. Let me just briefly tease out two of them for a quick follow-up. NBEO board testing, it feels much more formal and much more challenging than it was 30 years ago. Is it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I've had the good fortune of being able to go to the NBO for their test makeup construction weekends and participate as an observer in committees. And they do tremendous work. It's a tough job. I really feel sorry for the leadership at NBO. They have a tough job to do. They really have to stand up and protect the public, which is one of their rules, right? And make sure that the students that we're turning out know their stuff to do what they're supposed to be doing. And I can tell you they do it in painstaking detail. They take a lot of flack for it. We've seen some changes in scores in the last couple of years, which has everyone concerned. But I think overall the NBO does a very good job of what they're tasked with. And scope expansion, they've had to adjust for that. I guess if I had a complaint about NBO, it would be, I think more thought needs to go into maybe letting go of some of the older things that were tested and taught, 30 years ago, that today with doctors that are really being trained to be interpreters of data instead of gatherers of data, that maybe there needs to be some additional work done there. But I'm confident they'll do that.
That's fair. And then the other one I wanted to poke on is practice management education. To your point earlier, there's not a lot of, or there's a lot of difference in how the industry, requires an optometrist to be a business person. I think optometrists become very good business people over time. But can you speak briefly to the statement I hear too often, which is doctors just don't get taught practice management? I know ICO's got a deep commitment to that. Is it being taught differently? I would assume it is.
Yeah, I'll compare and contrast, right? For when you and I were in school, we had one practice management class, right? I think it was taught third year. And that was it, other than, maybe interactions with ODs or opportunities to participate in AOSA and AOA type things, maybe attend a CE, but that was really it. Now we're very deliberate about, at ICO at least, we have practice management incorporated into the curriculum every single quarter, every single year. There's something being taught about practice management. Now, early on, we're not doing a lot of the numbers of practice management. It's kind of the ethics of practice and how you access certain things and interacting with colleagues and writing letters. And so those things can be incorporated earlier on before students really know much about contemporary practice. But as it goes on, we bring in speakers. You've been one of our guest speakers before and have been very generous with your time. But we really try and expose students to as much as we can. But the thing that we struggle with still is students are so trained towards learning their craft, right? They want to be good doctors. They want to be good scientists and good clinicians. And so practice management isn't on national boards. And so practice management, when it comes to the grand scheme of their efforts, kind of gets pushed to the back until about graduation time. And then they go, oh, I should have been paying more attention. What can we do now? And to that point, we actually started something new last year here at ICO, where we did a kind of a boot camp of sort, literally the week after graduation, where we had practice management experts come in and offer lectures, and the students were completely done with their curriculum, completely done with their coursework. And so they were able to focus on that. And not all students wanted to participate in it, but the ones that really had aspirations of running their own practices had a tremendous opportunity to participate in that.
Yeah.
We're trying to be innovative as we go along as well.
Great. So we've kind of contrasted to the past. Let's talk looking forward. How is today's optometric education curriculum sort of in its way of future looking? How have you set a course to be sure that we're training doctors about what's coming?
Yeah, for future looking for sure. And, a lot of that has to do with the technology aspects that are being incorporated into our profession. The imaging that's being done now, we're just on the verge of what is AI really going to mean for us in instruction, certainly in patient care. I think it has more applications, and we're actually doing some clinical research here at ICO on incorporating AI with imaging, with blood sampling, and seeing if we can use the ocular images that we've been capturing for decades to make earlier predictions on diagnoses for systemic type disease. That stuff's very exciting for me. Again, one of the things that we bump into with regard to contemporary practice and looking forward is we're kind of dragging along, some of the techniques and things that were done decades ago because they're still being taught on NBO. And so that constrains us a little bit. It's kind of funny because periodically the dean will come in and say, oh, we're making these changes to the curriculum. We're contemporizing this. And I mean, every time we have that conversation, I say, so what's being dropped? And the answer most of the time is, well, we really can't. And so that's a struggle that we do have with NBO today as well.
I think that gives the audience, the people that haven't been thinking about optometric education since they were in school, perhaps, a really great insight as to the business of optometric education and the many different ways you have to think about making sure you teach, right? You have to teach to passing the boards, but you have to teach great scientists, and you have to do both. That's really helpful. You have, I know, incredible appreciation for the doctors who become faculty at your college. They do very important work. It's not a highly compensated position. Tell us a little bit about the importance and power of the faculty and what they do for the students.
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I'm so very thankful for our incredible faculty members. They really are true professionals. They're very dedicated to their own knowledge, becoming better teachers, and certainly the welfare of our students today, much more so than I think in years past. Historically, nationwide, faculty salaries, as you hinted, they do trail private practice and retail type practice salaries, and maybe even increasingly so today with some of the increases we've seen here of late. But that said, I do think there are many benefits to serving as a faculty member that reach beyond the financial aspect, and I think that's what attracts people here. Their satisfaction with the profession, I think, is actually a few ticks higher than probably most people in private or retail type practice. Their schedules are probably a bit more forgiving than someone doing perhaps 40 plus hours of direct patient care in a private or a retail setting. And these days, they have opportunity for some remote type work, where I think that's a bit more of a challenge for someone doing direct patient care unless they're using telehealth and technology, which we also provide that opportunity for our faculty to do as well.
Yeah, very important and a fantastic commitment to the future of the profession by our faculty. We have a lot of tuition dollars paying for today's education at our schools and colleges. It's been well and widely reported that the cost of education it feels high, but those tuition dollars aren't being frivolously put into a pot for somebody to take on a joyride. They are being spent in very strong focus on improving the world the student lives in and the education they get. What does the bulk of tuition dollars at ICO go toward?
Yeah, I appreciate that question as well, Scott. Higher education's a people business. So tuition dollars primarily go towards salaries for faculty and support staff, for their benefits. And to have good people, to be good teachers that want to stay and continue to improve, we have to retain them. And these days, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more challenging with some of the really attractive retail and private practice type salaries that they're kind of comparing and contrasting. We do have to invest heavily in our technology also. I'm a firm believer that if you're going to train state-of-the-art doctors, you have to have state-of-the-art technology for them to be trained on, and it really needs to be contemporary from the time they're in preclinic lab. I think you and I can both remember some pretty old coral and green type equipment in the laboratory back in those days. We don't see anything like that these days. We really work hard to make sure students have the best to learn on, not only in the preclinic laboratory phases, but in our clinic in the Illinois Eye Institute, and then when they go off into their externship settings as well. The doctors that we work with are truly top-notch.
Do you do any reviews of how students feel after college, after graduation, about the cost to benefit of their education? I have to feel like they feel well prepared to enter this market. Just curious if you have an off-the-cuff glimpse into what they think.
Yeah, we absolutely do. We actually survey students on a yearly basis. In fact, our dean meets yearly with groups of students to kind of talk about, while it's fresh in their mind, the previous year's curriculum and what was working, what wasn't, how our equipment, how our different faculty, and she has an evening set aside. She feeds them, and they have great conversation about what's working and what's not. And literally the next week, our president's administrative cabinet takes that data and goes to work on, okay, what do we need to improve? What can we back off on a little bit here in order to make improvements over here? So we absolutely do that. And then certainly as we approach graduation, we do an end cumulative survey, very detailed, asking students about all of their experiences cumulatively over the 4 years. And then we compare and contrast that year on year And we even follow up and do surveys a year after they're out, and then 5 years after they're out. We try and do one 10 years after they're out. Sometimes we don't get as good a response to those, but it's also very interesting to see, what changes as they go through different phases of their career.
Interesting. One of the biggest aspects of optometric education is the patient care experience. Each college has a different way of educating its students on patient care. I know at the Illinois College of Optometry, you have the Illinois Eye Institute that serves many in the community in Chicago where the college resides. But I also know you really leverage clinical externship sites. How important are they?
Yeah, high caliber externships really have been a hallmark of ICO's program for decades. Again, you and I can remember where there were limited number of sites. Now every student can pick really about 3 different externship sites of the 4 rotations they'll do during their 4th year. And what do they get out of that? It expands their mode of practice opportunities for the students. It broadens their clinical practice philosophies because they're working with different doctors than are on our faculty here within the Eye Institute. So they work with different clinicians. They work in different areas, different subspecialties, different focuses, different concentrations. It just rounds out that, I think we do a great basic education at ICO, and certainly the experiences our students get in the Illinois Eye Institute would far surpass what they might get in many places. But, the externship programs like the cherry on top, it's that opportunity they really also get to participate in their own education and deciding where they want to go and who they want to work with, even different parts of the country. I always even encourage students, hey, when else are you going to have an opportunity to go live in Alaska for 3 months and get something out of it educationally and decide if you like it or not, and if you want that to impact where you ultimately end up. So our students get a great deal out of the externship program, and it's, as I mentioned, it's long time been a hallmark of this program.
Just a little bit ago, you mentioned some of the slippage in national board scores across the country. Yeah. I know that you and your colleagues over at ASCO are monitoring those. We also know that college education, higher education has changed a lot, to your point, with more technology delivered education in the last 4 years. Do you have any sense of what those dips in scores might mean?
Yeah, it's pretty complex. We certainly have witnessed a decline in scores really across all exams over the past few years. And I think the reason's multifactorial. I don't think there's any one thing that's driving it. One, and first and foremost in our minds, is the COVID experience. There's no question in my mind learning was challenging for everyone. Our data shows that retention rates actually went down during COVID because of the modes of learning that had to be used for short periods of time. There are newer schools with newer and younger faculty that are working towards mastering their teaching efforts. That's likely at play because you do see a delta in some of the newer schools versus the more established schools. And I think some students also have a very different approach to their preparation for high stakes exams. Some students really look at it as, well, I'm going to kind of take it and see what's on it, and then I'll really buckle down and study and do it. I think it's a terrible method for studying, but some tell us that that's what they do. I think they rely much more on preparatory courses that are offered in some cases now. Most schools offer something, and I think they rely on that a bit more perhaps than their basic studies that they should just be drilling in on and digging in on. And as we discussed earlier, the breadth of the exams have increased. And so I do think it's more challenging exams today that our students have to experience and master than perhaps what we had to do 30 years ago. And then, we've seen increases in students that are coming to us with test anxiety, with learning challenges. And I'm not so sure the NBO has completely embraced that and taking on to deal with and offer the types of accommodations that students are offered today by law in undergraduate and in optometry schools. And then they get to this high stakes exam, and sometimes they say, nope, you don't qualify for those accommodations. And that rocks their world a bit, I'll tell you.
Well, it reassures me as an OD that's been out more than 30 years that those who do pass have gone through a very rigorous process and that they're very well prepared. I would ask you how, from a perspective of readiness, how motivated are today's students to be the future of the profession, not only being future thinking and patient care and new technologies, but also in leadership in general?
Yeah, great question also. And I'll tell you, I think young people today get a bad rap. They get a bad rap in media coverage. They get a bad rap in schools, whatever. But I honestly would stack our top students today up against the top students from 30 years ago, hands down across the board. The students that really come to us, that dug into their undergraduate studies and know their basic science, I mean, they are extraordinarily well prepared, much better than I honestly felt that I was at the time. But there certainly are differences in students, as I alluded to just a bit ago. But I think there's just as many positives as negatives with regard to that. Young people, I've spent my entire career working with young people because it's energizing for me. I get a kick out of it. Their questions always kind of keep you on your toes. And I enjoy coming to work just as much today, maybe even more than I did 30 years ago.
Well, let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, the not young people, and let's talk about alums.
Yeah.
I think this might be one of the most important topics because I've seen with you at ICO how much work goes into making sure that all the financial ends meet, and alums don't give much financial support back to their colleges. Yes, my friends listening, you don't give much back. And I know you're torn in a lot of places, but Dr. Colip, why should they consider philanthropy to their alma maters?
Yeah, I appreciate that one too, Scott. If we look nationally, undergraduate schools typically run about 20-30% of alumni give back. Maybe if you're at a big sports school or a big name, at a Harvard or something like that, those numbers can go double digits over that. And then, occasionally you hear about the billionaire tech person or billionaire financier that, made a whopping gift. That doesn't happen very often in optometry either. And just for a realistic contrast, in comparison, most graduate programs across the country, not just optometry, but all of them, the numbers probably more like about 10% of alumni or less for some programs actually write a check and get behind and support the institution. Lots of reasons why, I think, after talking to alumni for 30 years. We have very generous alumni at ICO, and I'm thankful for that every day, but we can always do better. And we work real hard to give them opportunities to get behind and support things at ICO that interest them. But really 5 and even 6-figure gifts in optometry are pretty infrequent across the board. Again, we've been blessed at ICO with some very generous gifts, yourself included, Scott. We appreciate that very much. And I guess every time I get an opportunity to talk to an OD about, well, why do you give? Why should I give? I paid tuition, right? We all did. I paid tuition too, paid my loans back. But, I choose to give because I feel good about it. I feel like my ICO degree, gave me a profession, gave me a field, work to do that I really love and enjoy. And if I didn't have that degree, I would be leading a very different life, and it would not be a better life, I don't think. I feel like I owe a lot of my lifestyle and pride in my profession to my OD degree and to ICO. And truth be known, as you alluded to earlier, tuition only pays for about 70% of the education that our young people receive today in graduate school, and certainly here at ICO. And so, truth be known, the value that they're receiving is much higher. And again, for one, I feel it's an obligation to return some of that to which I received and to give back. And I hope this podcast encourages more alumni to support their schools as well.
Well, in summary, I think of the many ways that today's doctors should better understand optometric education, and your words have helped because they can be an externship site, they can be a donor. Some actually go on to serve on boards at their colleges. But most importantly, I think that they are the future place of residence, of practice, of business for these young people who are coming through the schools. And I have to believe, as a last point that I'll let you make, that you feel strongly that students coming out are ready to participate in a wide variety of clinical settings, aren't they?
They are, and they need role models. We can only do so much in the 4 years that we have with them. And so I think sometimes when I have conversation with alumni and ODs, their expectation is that a student coming out of school should know as much as they know 20 and 30 years into their career, right? And that's just not even realistic. So we have to give them credit for where they are in their careers, and it's entry to practice level. And entry to practice level is very different than it was, again, 30 years ago. But we have to give them some grace, and we have to look at ourselves to be role models and to continue to mentor students, knowing that, there are nuances to practicing that you just can't get out of books, you can't get out of laboratories. And that's what, your audience can provide for these young graduates. They're still sponges. They want to learn, they want to do better, they want to please. And if we just give them some grace and some opportunity, I think it makes the whole system work better in the end.
Dr. Mark Colip, President of the Illinois College of Optometry, I really appreciate you bringing your passion point of views and being our guest on today's Think Again podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Scott. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Of course. And that's it for today's Think Again podcast, brought to you by GPN Visions, a peer-to-peer learning community to help grow your eye care business.